one thing that's come out of this, as you've talked about this during lockdown on Twitter and so on, Tom, is that not everyone obviously shares your view of how integral the Christian church has been in fostering the kind of culture and society we exist in, where hospitals are a given, where us simply going and almost tanking the economy for the sake of saving lives is an important thing to do. And I know you got into some conflict with a few people on Twitter after you posted this. You said, perhaps pondering why so many people are returning to volunteer as Good Samaritans, or why you take for granted that the poor and vulnerable should receive medical treatment. You find yourself thinking, if only there were a book on this. you posted
well, never let a crisis go to waste.
But that, of course, inevitably generated responses from people saying, what do you mean? There's people of all kinds of worldviews and religions in our NHS, and do you think Christians are just responsible for all this? Isn't that terribly arrogant? And I can understand that response, but what are you actually trying to say when you post that, Tom?
I'm trying to say that there is an enormous temptation in any society, in any period, to equate what you take for granted with human nature, and to assume that it's always been that way, and that therefore cultural contingency plays no part in it. But I think that if you look at the distinctive culture that prevails in most Western countries, I know Britain best, so talking about Britain, the idea that there should be a national health service, the idea that those who commit their lives and risk their lives to save the very sick are to be praised, and this is something which should be encouraged and saluted. This is simply not a given. I mean, and you just have to look at other times, other places where this has not remotely been taken for granted at all. And so therefore it does seem fairly obvious that you have to trace the origins of this and not just assume that it's bred of human nature. And there are kind of fairly hefty clues in the very names of the hospitals in London. So we've been hearing about St. Bartholomew's, the hospital in this crisis that has been most in the news here in Britain is St. Thomas's, because that's the hospital that Boris Johnson was taken to. That is a hospital that embeds in its name the history of Christianity in this country. It's dedicated to St. Thomas the Apostle, Doubting Thomas. Until the Reformation, it was dedicated to Thomas Becket, the Archbishop killed in the in Canterbury Cathedral. And I've just been rereading the general prologue to the Canterbury Tales, which describes the group of pilgrims leaving London in April for Canterbury. And Thomas is praised in that as a saint who heals the sick. And there's an incredible power, I find, in reading that now in this context and thinking Chaucer would have been writing at a time, in the aftermath of the Black Death, when kind of bushfires of the plague were still blazing across the town. Plague is worse in London in the winter. So in April, you're leaving a city that has been consumed by plague and sickness and heading out into the green open with the winds and the birdsong to go to the tomb of Thomas to pray. And St. Thomas's Hospital now provides us with a kind of link to that. That's part of the fabric of the city that I and Marcus live in. It's part of the fabric of the culture that explains why people are behaving the way that they do. We are the heirs of generations of people who have thought like that. And I can't see what the problem is in recognising that. I mean, whether you're a Christian or not, it just seems to me a kind of basic fact of history. And the fact that people don't want to acknowledge that suggests to me that, there's a slight anxiety of influence going on there. Slightly kind of Oedipal quality.
Marcus, anything to add to that?